Welcome to Inner Peace, Better Health. Today's conversation brings both depth and gentleness as we explore how spirituality becomes a steadying force in a culture that's often overwhelms us with noise, pressure, and distorted narratives. Joining us is Wanda Thibodeaux, a Christian author, storyteller, and guide for leaders carrying emotional burdens no one else sees. Through her work, she illuminates how faith, reflection, and inner grounding can offer a powerful antidote to the cultural messages that drain our hope and fractures our peace. Wanda, it's so nice to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, thank you. So, Wanda, from your perspective, what are the most damaging cultural ideas people internalize without realizing it?
Well, first of all, I do want to acknowledge that, culture is very different from place to place, So when I'm talking, mainly from the American standpoint. But I do think that there are things that, can carry over from place to place. But what I see a lot in the United States is this cultural idea of independence, grit, that you have to kind of do things by yourself and bootstrap everything. And this idea that if you succeed, it is because you worked for it. And the reason why I think that is so damaging is because if you think of the idea of community, it kind of breaks that. And so it kind of creates a lot of pressure on people to do things on their own, which
Mm.
leads to burnout and, wondering, how you can manage on your own. And I think it really makes us hesitant to ask for help when we need it. And so I think the stress that that causes is a huge issue. So that's kind of what I'm fighting a lot in most of my work.
Yes, yes. And I see these cultural ideas do influence people a lot, but it
Mhm.
also makes me wonder that influence is it subtle or very aggressive?
I think it shows up in aggressive and subtle ways. I think it is both.
Mm.
So, for example, you might have very implicit messages just from the time you are young. Like if we think about like when we go to school, they are taught like even like in kindergarten, like your first grades. Well, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like we are promoting this idea of work, 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 work,
Mm.
rather than just who are you? Who can you connect to? How do you make friends? So that's kind of what I'm saying, like, where it's implicit. Like, nobody comes right out and tells a kid, like, "Yeah, I'm doing this now for you because you have to do this." Like if nobody tells a 5-year-old like that because the 5-year-old is not gonna understand, adult concepts like that. But we
Mhm.
do say, "What do you wanna do?" And, like, we kind of prime them. So that's an example of, like, the implicit things. But then on the explicit side, we do have this ideology where we will talk, like, in motivational speeches and things like that, like, "Go get them," and, like, all of these ideas of that you have to, like, fake it till you make it, and you just have to, chest up high when you walk into a room, and rather than just saying, "I can be vulnerable, and I don't have
Mm.
to perform all the time." So, I think it comes out in both ways.
Yes, yes. I feel like you are being handed out a identity template and you're being pressurized to follow that. But it so happens that we humans are different in different ways and we can't
Yes.
just suit into one template. So I feel like that creates too much pressure on us. And once
Mhm,
we realize that there's this pressure, the next question becomes how do we rewrite those cultural ideas? Which brings
mhm.
us to the spirituality part.
Sure.
How does spirituality help someone reinterpret those messages in a healthier, more truthful way?
Well, again, I am speaking from my own perspective, and I come from the Christian background. But
Mm.
I think in general, faith, it doesn't matter what religion you necessarily follow, but it can give a counterweight to the ideologies and messages that we hear. So, for example, in the Christian tradition, we hear that God is very loving, that you don't have to earn your worth. So just
Mm.
like even right there, like that is foundationally different than what the world tells us. So if you
Mm.
are hearing that in your faith or those kinds of messages, then that's at least a counterweight. You can say, well, my religion says this, but the world says this. And you can say, like,
Mm.
try to resolve that issue and do that self exploration to say, well, which is right? Why am I
Mm.
believing what I believe? I think that's really important to just figure out where it comes from and, like, be
Mm.
intentional about the choice of what you're actually choosing to the values that you have.
Yes, yes. And it also makes me curious, is there a moment when you see people shift from striving to simply grounding themselves in grace?
I think for a lot of people, it comes
Mm.
when they reach that moment where they do all the things. They do
Mm.
everything that the world tells them they are supposed to do, that they strive, hours and hours a day. And then they
Mhm.
get to the goals that the world told them that they were supposed to achieve. They've done everything, and they're still ridiculously unhappy. They don't feel
Mm.
fulfilled. They don't know what they're living for anymore. They don't have
Mm.
goals because it's like, "Well, I already did it, right? So now what?"
Mm.
So that's when I think they get a little bit lost, and they're like, "Well, what did I even do this for?" And they start looking for more. So
Mm.
that period of burnout and,
Mm.
where you've reached the top level, or maybe you've just been in a job for so long that it's just like, there's gotta be something else, and you start
Mm.
questioning just because it's so repetitive. Those are the moments I think that we start looking away from the doing and start asking, "How can I be? How can I live my life and not just be a human doing?" As they say.
Yes, yes. I feel like this is the point where we understand that spirituality doesn't necessarily separate you from the crowd. It just helps you ground, right? And
Right.
I feel like this is something that becomes a bit difficult to understand for everyone, and this becomes even more difficult for people who are in positions of leaders, right?
Mhm.
So
Yes,
let's talk about that too. As
of course.
someone who works closely with leaders, where do you notice spiritual disconnection showing up most clearly?
For me, it's in the metrics and the quotas. So because they get so focused on the performance and the deliverables that they
Mm-hmm.
almost forget, like, the people around them. So
Mm.
they're not thinking about, "Okay, well, if my faith says I can love myself, I can love others, well, am I really doing that?" And so again, like, they are chasing the things of the world so much because that's, productivity, like, that's the thing that we idolize. And so when you
Mm.
start idolizing those things, it's like you're trading it for real faith, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So then that's really where I see the disconnect is that and a lot of times people don't even realize they're doing it because we are taught that those things are good. That's the way to succeed. That's what we call it.
Mm.
We call it success, right?
Yes, yes. Chasing till the point, chasing something that's very materialistic, till the point that you lose yourself sounds something that you would never do, but it's easier said than done, right? Which also makes me wonder, do you think leadership culture encourages vulnerability or does it still reward emotional suppression in this current culture?
I think that's a good question. I think that we are getting better at accepting it.
Mhm.
Like we have a lot of discussion now about like emotional intelligence and paying attention to how people feel. But here's the caveat that I'm gonna put on it. I think the reason we emphasize that is not so much because we care about people, is because we see the emotional intelligence as just another path to get the productivity. If I pay attention, like, I'm being completely serious here, right? If we
True,
pay
true.
attention to how people feel, and I can read that, then I can manipulate it to my benefit. So I think we have to be really, really careful about how we are addressing that because there's nothing wrong with emotional intelligence. I use the phrase positive manipulation all the time. And like therapists use that to like help us find ourselves and like help us discover like how we need to grow. So there is such a thing, or
Mhm.
even a parent can understand that. Like if a child is doing something that they shouldn't do, making the positive alternative look attractive to the child so they choose the right thing. Like, so that's what I mean by that. But in the leadership, I think sometimes we can use the emotional intelligence to say, well, this is what I want the company to do. So I'm going to read my people to get that rather than saying, what does that person actually, not the company, what does the
Mhm.
person need? And I think there's a huge difference.
Yes, yes. I feel like we're in a place where we're improving, but there's
Mhm.
still a lot more to improve, I feel like. And the people who are in leader positions too, I feel like the very first question they need to ask themselves is that are you leading publicly and privately, hurting?
Yeah.
Is that what you're doing? So if it's that, if it's what that you're doing, I feel like maybe you're wrong. You should
Yeah.
be able to publicly lead and privately lead too. It doesn't
Yeah.
make any sense that you're hurting on yourself and you're alone, but you're trying to lead some people. So
Yeah.
yes, there's a lot more work that needs to be done right now, and I'm actually just happy that we're at least improving.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yes, yes. And Wanda, let's talk about your own story too.
Sure.
See, your own journey includes trauma and healing. How
Mhm.
has that shaped your understanding of the conflict between cultural pressure and spiritual truth?
Well, I mean, without going too much into detail, but the basics of my story is that, I come from a domestic issue or a domestic home that was not very good. I did not have the greatest childhood. There's a lot of alcoholism in the home. But in the course of that, I really did implicitly and explicitly get the idea that work was the way to earn my worth. So I've felt that a lot. And so I've pulled the 90-hour weeks trying to get that very much so. So it was very much my identity that way. That was how I got, attention and what I thought was love, right? So what really started to change though is that again, you like I said, you reach that point of burnout. And that's
Mm,
essentially what happened. And I started like, I can't do this anymore. Like, and
mm,
so it was this huge conflict because of course everybody wants, affection and to be accepted, right? But I'm like, but I can't keep working like this. So what am I gonna
mm,
do? So then I started to really look back at like what had happened to me and all of those things that I had been through and say like where did all of like where did my beliefs about this come from? And really
mm,
started valuing like how can I work because I couldn't keep working the way that I was, right? And I knew that. So then I had to ask myself, what is a way that I can work that is really me, not just what
mm,
people wanted me to be, but how can I work in a way that's really who I am that's not gonna just drain me every single day. And I started
mm,
to ask myself, were they right? All these people who had said I needed to do this or said I couldn't do that or whatever. And I really just started challenging those messages. And in terms of
mm,
the spiritual side, I'm like, well, again, like I had mentioned before, the spiritual story that I had been told in Christianity was so much different than the way that I was actually living. I'm like, I have to reconcile these. If I'm going to
mm,
be faithful, I cannot work the way that I am. And if I'm
mm,
working for this, it's like I have to choose between the 2. So that is where I kinda said like, "Well, okay, I can work and I can work for God. I can
mm,
work to help other people through this. I can help them." My mission right now is to help people who are disconnected from the joy of God find it again. I'm like, I
mm,
can work in that and not feel tired because I know
mm,
how that feels. So it like totally shifted me and got me away from just, okay, I need to get a paycheck. Like, there was something a lot deeper to that. Now, of course, do I need a paycheck? Yes. Yes, I do. But it like, why I was doing it, like, it wasn't from fear anymore, I guess is really what I was saying. It was because I really had a mission that I felt called to do, and that's really when I'm like, "Okay, I need to lay the groundwork for this," and I did. Like, I tried to build my websites, do everything, and so, like, I just shifted everything because that's what I knew I had to do.
yes, yes. I feel like that's the wonderful part because the insights that you use to guide people is something that you have gained from lived experience.
Mhm.
And what you said also makes me curious about the do you feel that healing changes the way you hear God or the way you hear yourself?
I would say, I mean, my experience, with how I work is not necessarily how other people work, and it's not my experience with God. God has an intimate relationship, at least in my belief. That's a very personal thing. So the way I experience
Mm,
him might not be the way other people experience him.
mm,
But for me, looking to God now, it's like when I have that foundation and I put that there, like it like you said before, it is this grounding experience. And I
mm,
feel like when I work now, there are moments where I don't know, like, because my main profession is writing, all of the books and articles and things that I put out. But there are times now where it's like, I don't know where those insights come from. And it's like
mm,
I'm synthesizing things from a place like I don't even get. And, you can call that messages from God or whatever you want to call it, but I know it doesn't come from me. Like, it comes
Mhm.
from somewhere some people, some religions, they'll say, like, that's ancestral knowledge, like, that's just deep root knowledge. But some of these things are coming out, and then I'll go back and I'll read it later, I'm like, I can't believe I wrote that. Because, like, that hits, that's powerful, and it's like, okay. Like, I don't get it, I don't get it where it comes from, and I'm not saying everything I write is powerful. Sometimes I write drafts that will never see the light of day, believe me. But
Yes,
it's
yes.
just that idea that, I can look at it now and know that, like, there is some connection that I guess what I'm trying to say is when I create a draft and I do my work now, I feel the moments that I know, like, that's the message that people need to hear. And
Mm.
that's what like, so when I mean, some creators, like, they struggle with that. They don't really know, like, what their messaging is, but 9 times out of 10 when I'm creating something, I know, like, if you say, "Okay, well, what's the pull quote on that?" Like, I can feel it. And I feel it as I'm creating it, and so it's like it's easier for me to create the thing because I know, like, the core of it, and I know, like, how people like, I'm very sensitive to, like, the emotional response that people are gonna have, like, I kind of intuit a lot with that, so I kind of know what to say, and
Mm.
I end up being a little bit poetic, I use my metaphors and my analogies, um, so I think it because I synthesize that way and I integrate the way that I do, I use a lot of psychology in my writing, I use a lot of neurology in a way, and, like, I try and use, like, experiential things that people will understand, and because I'm integrating all of those things, I think people grasp the spiritual and core ideas of feeling that I'm trying to get across, and so, like, I've had people tell me, like, "Your work is deep." Are you familiar with Star Wars at all?
Oh, I do know, like, on surface level, sure.
Okay, well, you don't need to know a lot about it, but there is one of the movies that is from that franchise,
Mm.
Obi-Wan, one of the characters, he goes into this bar, and he uses the Force to basically mess with this guy to convince him to go home and not do, things that he shouldn't be doing, and the guy, he's like, "I want to go home and rethink my life." But the point in bringing that up is, like, I have been told, like, that's what my writing does, like, that's how it makes it people feel, like, not in a bad way, but just, like, it's deeper writing, it is I always say it's not a cat poster, not at any way, shape, or form. You can feel good after it, but you will also be challenged, like, that's
Mm.
my duality in my writing, I would guess I'd say.
Yes, yes, and I feel like that's very good part. Not only you feel comfort from it, but you also feel motivated, right? That's the
Mhm,
wonderful
yes,
part. And I feel like once you start living your life, you pick up stuff up. And
yes,
if, yeah, both good and bad stuff. And by experience, you're doing something and it turns out to be good. And if some other person asks you, where did you pick that up? You can't just
yeah,
point out, right? You can't,
right,
yeah, on the 21st June of 2024, I did this and someone told
right,
me this. You can't do that. And you
yes,
can't even talk about the process where you got that information. It's just you live your life, you pick stuff up. And I feel like when you're creating something, you get into a zone. It so happens you get it. You get in
mhm,
your intuition works at 200 percentage maybe.
yes,
And you start gathering all the information that you've lived through that point till that point
yeah,
and you put that into your creative work. I feel like that's how it works, and that's
yeah,
the wonderful part of it, I guess. And now that we're talking about your works, let's dig more deeper into it, I guess.
sure,
In your newest work, you invite people to thrive through grace. How
mhm.
does grace specifically counter the performance driven culture we live in?
The biggest thing that I can say to that is, again, like, we have this idea that we have to perform, and I think
Mm,
underneath that, there are expectations. Again, whether it's implicit or explicit, and the whole idea of grace is that you can kind of slow down and give yourself a little bit of forgiveness, first of all. That's one definition of grace, but also this idea that you are not alone. That grace is being in relationship with God, like, that's another definition of it, and so I kind of joined the 2. So when I say grace in the grind, grace in the workplace, I mean that you can be self-forgiving when you make mistakes, you mess up, you delete the Excel spreadsheet by mistake, right? But it's also that you don't go to work just to work. You go to work to connect with people, and you know that if you make a mistake, that people are gonna be there for you. They're gonna understand, like, everybody who is next to you in your cubicle, like, they get what you are going through and that you
Mhm.
can depend on, like, there's trust in that. And that to me is what kind of keeps you going through all the work
Mhm.
is that forgiveness and connection that we have. So, this whole idea of grace, I feel like if we can just connect to it rather than saying, "Oh, I've just gotta go get a paycheck." Like that, like grace can be something that we can access. Like
Mhm.
it's not a pipe dream. It can be there, but we have to work on it. We have to be intentional about going to get it, right? And seeking it out.
Yes, yes. I feel like grace in a way is allowing yourself to take a pause when you're feeling like you need a pause. I feel like if you're getting a mail saying you've done something wrong, you gotta correct it
Yes.
ASAP. You don't just sit and
Yes.
damage whatever. You're putting your hands on your head and you're all cranky and stuff. But you could just gracefully handle that by saying yes, I'll get back to you.
Mhm.
I and I
Yeah.
and I do know it's easier said than done. So, the only thing I can say at this point is listeners, you can give the best answers to yourself because the questions, the problems are in your life. So just take a moment, take a little pause and think about it stably, steadily, and hopefully, and I believe in you, you'll get an answer, right?
Yeah. One
When
thing I wanna add to that too, though, is that, when we think about grace, I think we have this concept of just being here in this lifetime, in this moment. And
Mhm.
I think we kind of when we think about religion, especially in the Christian tradition, there's more than that. There is
Mhm.
the eternity that we have to think about. And so all of the work that we do is in service to something bigger. The
Mhm.
whole reason why we work is to glorify God, at least, like, again, in the Christian tradition. So, that is the grace that's there, is that everything that we do is for that purpose. It's not for us, it's not for, the paycheck. It's to create something bigger than us, a connection to help other people to love the way that God said to love. So, in that sense, like, we can kind of remember that things are temporary. That's the big
Mhm.
message that I wanna say is, like, grace is about seeing beyond that Excel spreadsheet that you accidentally deleted, and just saying that this is not forever. It is
Mhm.
not, like, you don't have to just languish in the idea
Mhm.
that this is just another day where I have to get up and, like, clock in, right? There's more to
Yeah.
that.
Yes, I feel like grace is realizing that there's more to what we're able to see, which
Mhm.
also makes me wonder, is grace something people struggle more to receive or to extend to themselves?
I think that's a good question. I would say that we understand it. Like
Mhm.
cognitively, we understand that we are supposed to be self forgiving. We understand all of that. But actually getting to the place where we leave those thoughts and feelings behind, I think is where we struggle because we don't necessarily have all the tools all the time to say, well, I keep thinking this negative thought about myself. I can't give myself grace. And we don't necessarily know how to dive into that. And
Mm.
so I think that's where it gets a little bit complex. Like we want to, I think, but we don't necessarily know how. And again, it comes back to that connection point with other people because I call people who help us with that like mental dirt shovelers because we have all this dirt and negative thoughts in our head, and sometimes other people we can do a great job on our own to a degree, but sometimes
Mm.
other people, like whether it's a therapist, counselor, or even a coworker, we need other people to help us recognize, you're being really hard on yourself, or, can you challenge that bias right now? That's really not the way things are. Like, and sometimes we don't even see it, and if we don't see it, we can't extend ourselves grace in the really authentic, full way that we really need to. So we need other people through this process, I guess is the main
Mhm.
takeaway point there.
So, what you said also makes me wonder if someone knows that the person needs more grace. They have that in their mind, but they don't know how to do that. What kind of suggestion can you give for them?
For me personally, and
Mm.
I don't know if it will work for everyone, but I can tell you that what has been very effective for me, very helpful, is because, again, like with my background, I was the person who was pulled in the 90-hour weeks. I know what it's like to be busy. So for
Mm,
me, learning to slow down, and I don't
mm,
necessarily mean doing less, I just mean being aware. So, for
mm,
example, if you know anything about yoga, you know that there is a very, very simple pose called corpse pose. And basically, you just lay on the floor on your back. That's what corpse pose is.
yeah.
So, even doing something like that and just being aware of corpse pose feels like this in my body. And now I can breathe. Or maybe I felt tension there. And oh my gosh, to finally let that go, I feel like I'm going to cry. And like,
Mm,
being willing to go through those small moments like that and just be aware like that and say, "I don't have to do right now. Maybe it's
mm,
only 30 seconds, but I'm gonna take the 30 seconds." And I guess what I'm trying to get at here is that from the neurological standpoint, taking those small moments, we need those small moments to rewire ourselves to not do all the time. That is how we learn to be at peace and slow down. And we're basically retraining the nervous system to operate at a slower rate than we have been
mm,
and to connect with the spirituality side. But
mm,
it takes time. Neurology, like our brain, like that takes time to rewire all that. So I would just say be consistent, start small. Like I said, if it's even 30 seconds, and it can be like, it doesn't have to be laying on the floor. Okay? It can be like going to get a nice hot cup of coffee. It can be calling somebody that you trust, talking for 5 minutes, whatever fills your cup, as they say. Just
mm,
find little ways to pause and do that. Like just micro pauses is really what I'm getting at. And we don't need a lot of big things necessarily to get us going again. We need those small, consistent things to keep that neurology forming in our heads because then once we get that going, then we can think better. And if we can
mm,
think better, then we can counterweight, like on a cognitive level, the negative feelings that we're having. But we got to get there from the experience of doing that and feeling it on a very personal, deep core level. We need that too because experience encodes in the brain too. So we've got to take it.
mm. Yes, yes. Agreed, agreed. It's just
Mhm.
consi conscious slowing down and being consistent at that while not having big expectations. Because if you're slowing down and then you're like you want results, then you're putting the same pressures the cultural ideals have put on
Yeah.
you. So be aware of that, I guess.
Yeah.
And yeah, so Wanda, it was a wonderful conversation and also very fun. But before we wrap this podcast, for our listeners who would love to connect with you, can you please tell them the ways to do so?
Sure. You can find me on LinkedIn. I do have a featured post that has pretty much all of the ways that you can connect with me. So I would recommend going there first. But you can also visit my author site, which is wandathibodeaux.com, or my sister site for the podcast, which is faithfulontheclock.com. That has a ton of peripheral content to my main show. So it's got a lot of my faith based writing if you want to check that out.
Great, great. So all the links regarding how to connect with Wanda will be in our show notes. So I request all the listeners to go and check that too. Thank you, Wanda, for joining us on the show. It was very wonderful with you.
Thank you. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Yes, yes. So thank you, Wanda, for bringing such heartfelt wisdom to this space. For everyone listening, let this conversation be a reminder that you are not defined by the harshness of culture, but by the truth and peace that lives within you. Lean into your spiritual grounding, question the narratives that dim your light, and choose the path that restores your joy. Inner peace isn't found by escaping the world, it's found by seeing it through a clearer, more compassionate lens. Thank you for tuning in. This has been your host, Charu, and you've been listening to Inner Peace, Better Health, where peace is power and overthinking is overrated.